Title: The Mirror of Giving. Year: 114 million. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called the village so true to place, as unassuming as its name. Nestled in the cradle of forgotten hills, time passed gently there, unnoticed by the world's grandeur. And yet, beneath that quiet soil, something stirred. The caller of quiet things had returned. She bore no banner, no prophecy, no shining light, only her voice, soft and strange, like a bell rung beneath the earth. Her goal was not salvation, but invitation. At the well, she met the key without a door, a man broken up by pain, but by endless searching. He had spent his life trying to fit into the places people swore were sacred. "Why come here?" he asked her. "Because quiet hides what noise tramples," she replied. "To discover truth is to topple the throne of your assumptions." He followed her, not out of faith, but because he was tired of climbing ladders that led nowhere. Chapter 2. She did not teach, but watched. She swept leaves. She tended the sick. She fed a girl who no longer spoke. The village thought her kind, even wise, but not special. Until the day of the severed wind. A storm no one saw coming broke the ridge paths and scattered the livestock. Panic ballooned. The caller moved from door to door, helping not by command, but by gesture. The key followed. And another, and another. By sunset, the village was not restored, but it was breathing together. A woman wept into the caller's shoulder. "I've never known peace in giving." "That's because you were never told your part of the healing." Chapter 3. Weeks passed. The village built a communal hall, not grand, just wide enough for all to gather. Inside, a mirror hung. Its surface was dull, warped. Beside it, a plaque: "To discover truth is to topple the throne of your assumptions." No one polished the mirror. They let it reflect imperfectly, because in its ripple they saw one another. Helping others, they found, was not martyrdom. It was recognition. Now the caller of quiet things has vanished again, but the key remains. Mouth searching, opening, and listening. Title: The Edge of Familiar Walls. Year: 139,807,006. 192.3. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The lone veteran had built walls around everything he sheltered. His routines, his mind. After the border collapse, he had watched too many die. He'd lost comrades' dreams, even his reflection. Now he planted no roots and trusted no sky. Until one morning, a hermit arrived. The laughing hermit wore tattered robes and bells sewn into his boots. He asked no permission, danced across the veteran's walls, and whistled songs older than war. "Why are you here?" the veteran finally asked. "Ask why you are," said the hermit, grinning, and something cracked. It wasn't the wall, it was what hid behind it. Chapter 2. Each night, the hermit shared riddles. Each morning, he left footprints in places the veteran had sealed. One night, he sang a story of a man who built a fortress so safe, he forgot why he built it. "Was he free?" asked the veteran. "No," said the hermit, "but he was secure." And that was the first time the veteran laughed in years. They began to build together. Not walls, bridges. Across the marshes, to the ruins, through the ghost roads where the forgotten still whispered. The veteran remembered his name and began questioning his limits. One at a time. Chapter 3. When the storms came again, the hermit vanished. Only his laughter remained woven into the wind chimes the veteran had refused to hang. But the veteran didn't wall himself in. He opened his door. He offered shelter. He told stories. He became the hermit in time. Only he didn't wander. He stayed, because he had learned that growth isn't always movement. Sometimes it's standing still while your walls fall. The only limits, he taught the children of the refugee caravans, are the ones you never question. Then he'd laugh, and the bells in the doorway would answer. Title: The Lessons of the Veil. Year: 139,615,384.6. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They said the voice beneath the veil was cursed. She came from the east wind wastes, where storms etched stories into sand, and wind spoke secrets through ruins. Always hooded, always listening, she wandered through the remnants of collapsed kingdoms, collecting fragments of truths no one wanted to face. Her veil shimmered not with magic, but memory. Those who heard her voice claimed to remember forgotten failures they had buried beneath bravado. In the city of Milarath, a place famed for precision and pride, failure was a fork. Letter words scrubbed from scrolls, softened in speech, never acknowledged. They prided themselves on mastery, on resilience forged by success, which is why they summoned her. A rift had torn through the base of Mount Bathra, threatening to consume Alarithe's oldest district. Engineers failed, architects fled, oracles wept. The city needed not a solution, but understanding. The voice stood at the edge of the chasm and spoke one word: listen. And did, until a child not more than 10 echoed her word into the rift. From the depths came a tremor, not of destruction, but recognition. The wild myth stirred, a creature made of roots and memories. The wild myth had once been the guardian of harmony between ambition and humility. Vanished centuries ago by Alarithe's refusal to acknowledge limits, it had slipped beneath the city's foundations. Now, awakened by resonance, it climbed. The voice beneath the veil did not flee. She bowed and spoke a second word. Teach. Chapter 2. The wild myth did not roar. It hummed. Its body was tangled with broken statues, weeping vines, and pages from journals never finished. As it moved, it shed echoes of failure, moments when projects collapsed, when oaths were broken, when pride silenced apology. The people of Alarith panicked. They demanded the voice silence it. She did not. Instead, she placed her hand on the ground and whispered stories of her own, of mistakes that taught, of journeys abandoned and resumed, of dreams that had to shatter before they could reshape. The wild myth listened and paused. In that stillness, the people began to see. A healer stepped forward. I once misdiagnosed a child. I said nothing. She died. A mason followed. I built a bridge that collapsed. My apprentice was on it. Tears fell like first rain. Even resistance can teach, but only when you stop resisting the lesson. The wild myth opened its mouth not to devour, but to offer. Inside, a library of echoes. Every failure Alarith had buried, preserved, waiting. You hid them, the voice said, thinking shame would save you, but you starved yourselves of growth. A counselor dropped to her knees. What do we do now? The voice lifted her veil. Her face bore every regret she'd ever worn, and every strength they had gifted her. To begin again. Chapter 3. Alarith did not erase its mistakes. It built around them. New walls were etched with stories of failure. Bridges were named for those who fell. Scholars learned that resilience did not mean avoidance, it meant integration. The voice beneath the veil remained, not as a prophet, but as a mentor. She never gave commands. She asked questions. She listened to silence, and in that silence new songs formed. The wild myth carved gardens from the wreckage of ruins. Its roots filtered water through the city's veins, leaving nourishment in place of denial. The child who had first echoed the voice became a keeper of the new archive, a library, where broken tools were preserved beside innovations, where apologies were pinned beside declarations. One day, a foreign king visited Alarith. He asked the council, "How did you survive the rift?" The child answered, "We stopped pretending we were unbreakable." The king scoffed. The wild myth emerged behind him and smiled, not to threaten but to remind. The city was no longer afraid of collapse, because it had learned to build from it. And as the stars shifted about the cradle of Titans, Alarith stood not as a monument to perfection, but as a living testament to resilience. And beneath the veil, the voice whispered, "Begin again, always." Title echoes in the silence. Year 139,423,076.9. Era Cradle of Titans. Author Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the back alleys of Craterfall, the scribe of vanishing things ran her ink through 100 still confessions. She wasn't a journalist. She was a listener. The broken, the betrayed, the burdened, they found her, sometimes with tears, sometimes with blood on their hands. She would write no names, no judgment, only the truth as it trembled out of people too afraid to speak it aloud. One night, a man came with laughter in his eyes and a gun in his coat. The cursed gambler. He didn't ask to be written, he asked to listen, and the scribe hesitated. That was new. After 2, they met under dripping eaves and broken clock towers, where the city's time had long stopped working. "I lost too much," he told her. "You mean you've taken too much," she replied. But she still listened. As he confessed in riddles and regret, the scribe wrote nothing, not on paper, but his words etched something into her, into the hollow parts she never thought could hold another story again. He returned each week, and each time she spoke a little less, and he heard her more, until silence became sacred between them. Not empty, just whole. Chapter 3. When the city cracked open from within, when betrayal poured from the palace like floodwater, the scribe and the gambler found themselves among the last standing. Not heroes, witnesses. She documented the collapse, not with bias, but with empathy. He made no bets, only choices. They opened a shelter beneath the ruins of the Justice Hall. There were no sermons, only quiet rooms, warm meals, then blank pages. You can only rise as high, the scribe told a weeping soldier, as you're willing to fall. And the gambler nodded. For once, he didn't roll the dice. He stayed, and he listened. Title: The Ritual of Timing. Year 139,230,769.2 Era. Cradle of Titans. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac. Series 2025. Chapter 1. The northern frontier of Old Valley was a place of silence. Not peace silence. A vast, ice-wrapped realm where voices froze before they could echo and history moved slower than wind. There, among glacial tombs and storm-swallowed relics, the Ice Whisperer made her rounds. She was born with breath that could melt memory and a voice that soothed avalanches. It was said she spoke to no one, but every shift in the glaciers answered her presence. Her face was always veiled, her tools carved not for beauty, but for precision. They said she was waiting. They did not know what for. That changed when the Ghost Walker returned. He had once been a scout for the Empire of Nine Seals, long thought lost in the second collapse. His footsteps left no mark, his presence no shadow. Rumors named him deserter, prophet, wraith, but the Ice Whisperer recognized him. Too long, she said, her voice a cloud against the cold. Just enough, he replied. He bore with him a map carved into bone, showing fault lines where the continent threatened to tear. A frozen reckoning was coming, one that neither empire nor engineering could contain. We cannot stop it, he said, but we can shape what remains, she replied. And so they began the gathering. Chapter 2. They summoned those the empire had long forgotten. Glacial archivists who remembered lost languages, nomadic signalers whose drums echoed below the frost line, elemental welders from the ice cities of Iskar. Each one came with a piece of knowledge incomplete on its own. The Whisperer wove silence between them. The Ghost Walker tied threads no one saw. Together, they mapped the final days not as defeat, but as choreography. They would not stop the shattering. They would direct it. The plan was mad, sacred, impossible alone. The glaciers would fall into sequence, cracking in a pattern aligned with underground hallways that could redirect the destruction into controlled renewal. It would require exact timing, shared breath, mutual surrender. Some resisted. This cannot work, said the fellow priest. It is too fragile. So is every beginning, said the Whisperer. They trained for weeks, each person memorizing a moment, a signal, a step. Failure by one would doom all. The stars moved, and the time came. Chapter 3. The ritual began beneath the blood moon. Drums thudded through the ice. Flames were lit not for heat, but for rhythm. The mad bone was shattered and scattered, marking positions like constellations come to ground. Each team member stood at their post, waiting, not for power, for timing. The Ghost Walker gave the final nod. The Ice Whisperer exhaled a single word. Now. A pulse echoed through the glacier. Fault lines split along the bones of forgotten rivers. Ice fell not as ruin, but as transformation. Caverns collapsed into corridors. Frozen towers tilted into conduits. The land reshaped itself like breath. After a scream, no one person controlled it. All did, it ever. When it ended, the frontier was no longer silent. It sang. A city born of collapse, carved not by a will, but by we. Later, when the Empire returned to reclaim what it had abandoned, they found a people endowed not by survival, but by design. They asked who led this miracle. The Ghost Walker stepped aside. The Ice Whisperer said only, waiting is not weakness. It is the ritual of timing. And above them, the stars pulsed once in reply, for they remembered what silence dare not speak. And so did the world. Tidal, beneath the storm's shadow. Year 139,038,461.5. Era. Cradle of Titans. Author Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac. Series 2025. Chapter 1. The storm herald hadn't flown in weeks. Not since the summit collapsed and left her buried beneath steel and shame. She healed, yes, but the self-doubt lingered longer than any wound. Now she watched the city from above, never landing. Not yet. Below, whispers rose of a new threat, an unknown vigilante known only as the Bone Break Bride. They said she didn't save people, she punished them. The herald didn't believe in vengeance, but she believed in patterns. And this one felt like a mirror. Chapter 2. When their paths collided, it was a fist that flew with silence. Two figures cloaked in shadow and history, each asking the same unspoken question. Am I enough? The bride broke it first. You could have stopped me hours ago. Why didn't you? The herald answered with her eyes. I'm not sure I can. Together they unraveled their stories over fire escapes and radio towers. Brahma braided them. Doubt had mothered them both. But as lightning carved the skyline behind them, the bride looked up and said, maybe victory isn't being unbreakable. Maybe it's knowing you'll rise after. And the herald wept. Chapter 3. Their partnership was never announced. No team name, no symbols. But across the districts, fewer children cried at night. Fewer fists were thrown in desperation. Justice returned in whispers, and not all of them hurt. In the final battle with the syndicate of mirrors, It was the bride who took the first blow, and the herald who caught her before she fell. Victory, she whispered, has no meaning without the bruises beneath it. They didn't win because they were the strongest. They won because they doubted, and acted anyway, together. Title: The Climb of Remembrance. Year: 138,846,153.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They call him the once god, not in reverence, but in accusation. Long ago, he had ruled from the Spire of Signals, a technological ziggurat that once held dominion over the Valley of Echoes. Through neural commands, biosignal drones, and fear-coded speech, he shaped a world in his image. The people bowed, not out of love, but because their thoughts were no longer entirely their own. But no tyranny is eternal. The collapse rewrote everything. Now he wandered in flesh like anyone else. Powerless, unremembered by most, cursed by those who knew. He bore no title, only a name whispered with disdain. Call. His journey brought him to the wound, a fractured mountain carved by rebellion and time. It was said that if one reached its summit without hate, the water that remembers would show them their truth. No one had ever returned whole. And yet, Cole climbed, not for redemption, for rest. But the mountain had other plans. Chapter 2. The first plateau held mirrors-guided obsidian pools that reflected not form, but fault. In them, Cole saw the faces of those he had silenced. A sister who once believed in him, a counselor who wept for the people, a child who vanished when dissent became dangerous. Their eyes did not accuse. They asked, "Why did you forget us?" He fell to his knees, because he had believed that control was compassion, that direction was destiny, that perfection, once reached, absolved all pain made along the way. He whispered their names. The water below shimmered in acknowledgement. He moved on. The second plateau held voices, recordings woven into wind. They echoed every justification he ever made. Each sounded hollower than the last. There, he found the water that remembers. It flowed not in rivers, but as mist coiling around memory and bone. And within it stood a figure, not a ghost, undyed. He bore the name the water that remembers, her form changing with Call's shifting remorse. In her presence, the mountain ceased to loom. It listened. "Do you seek forgiveness?" she asked. "No," he said, "only silence." "And why climb?" He swallowed. "To learn if I can forgive myself." Chapter 3. The final stretch was steep not with ice or stone, but memory. With each step, the summit showed him not what he did, but what he didn't. The apologies he withheld, the healing he refused, the humanity he denied. Halfway, he nearly turned back, but a voice whispered through the water, "The summit may crown you, but the climb reveals who you truly are." He kept climbing. At the peak, no one waited. No God, no judgment, only a pool, still as sleep. He looked into it and saw not the ruler he was, but the man he might become, scarred, softened, capable of listening. He whispered, "I was wrong." The wind held its breath, and then the water moved, not in punishment, in release. It seeped into his skin, into his memory, washing not away, but through, leaving behind the pain, but diluting the poison. He descended not as Call the once god, but as Call the climber. When he returned to the valley, no one cheered, but a child offered him water, and he accepted it, without command, without pride, only thanks. And the water that remembers smiled unseen, because the healing had begun. Title: The Laughing Scar. Year: 138,653,846.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The last guardian of the first flame didn't guard much anymore. She mostly drank tea on her rooftop, watched pigeons argue with crows, and muttered at the cities and the stream of new rules. Once, she had battled beasts that slithered from rifts in reality. Now, she argued with delivery bots over package placement. It wasn't that she had forgotten how to fight. It was that no one asked her to anymore. Until one day, a beast whisperer knocked on her door. He was bleeding from the forehead, laughing like a man who'd seen too much and wasn't quite sane anymore. "Something's waking up," he said. "Is it a polite something?" she asked. "No." "Then we'll need better tea. Wounds become sacred when they teach you who you are." Chapter 2. They didn't train. They argued. The guardian preferred swords. The whisperer insisted on song. She claimed beasts respected steel. He claimed they respected grief. The city's officials dismissed them both until entire districts began reporting creatures made of shadow and bureaucracy. Nightmares of unsent emails and unresolved guilt. The duo moved in silence through the alleys and archives. They didn't slay monsters, they named them. And once named, the monsters lost power. But naming them came at a cost. Each name was a mirror. The guardian saw herself. The child never mourned. The hero never thanked. The scar she always hid. She wept once. The whisperer bowed. "Now," he said, You are ready. Chapter 3. The flame she once guarded burned again, not on an altar, but in herself. The city never noticed the beasts disappearing, but graffiti began appearing strange phrases. Wounds become sacred when they teach you who you are. Some laughed, some cried, some finally called their mother. The guardian vanished again. Rumor says she's in the forest, teaching crows how to curse. The whisperer writes lullabies no one hears. But the city is quieter now, and if you ask the wind for courage, it might reply with her laugh, or his song, or your own voice finally returned. Title: The Unspoken Sky. Year: 138,461,538.5. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the final age of the Cradle, when Titans had fallen into legend and their bones were used to build cities, there walked a shepherd of dreams. He was not called prophet or sage, though both titles had once been flung at him. He was simply known as the Dreamtide Shepherd. No flaw, no followers, only visions that lingered after sleep, guiding those brave enough to listen. He had seen the sky break twice, once in war, once in truth, and now he searched for the one who fell from the sky twice, a being prophesied to return bearing not vengeance, but revelation, a comet of contradiction, the truth no one wanted, but everyone needed. The stars had gone quiet. The people below whispered safety into each other's ears while building walls taller than memory. Peace had become a performance, and honesty a heresy. The shepherd crossed the ashen veil, where the ground still hissed with radioactive regret, and into the echo reaches. There, atop a ruin of forgotten glass, the sky split again, and she fell, not like a star, like a truth being born. The one who fell from the sky twice rose with bloodied palms and eyes that held equations older than time. "You're late," said the shepherd. "I waited for the silence to listen," she replied, and the stars blinked in fear. Chapter 2. They traveled through territories that feared honesty like fire. The shepherd spoke softly to the land, coaxing rain from stone, stories from soil. The sky, born one whose name, she said, was borrowed and ever-changing, walked barefoot, each step leaving a question unanswered. When they reached the city of courteous lies, the people welcomed them with choreographed sincerity. They offered comfort, praise, and chains made of gold-threaded flattery. At the feast, the shepherd was invited to speak. He said only, "Peace built on pretense is a prison." Gasps, polite silence, no applause. Then the sky-born one rose and placed a single memory on the banquet table, a glowing shard from the vault of what was suppressed. In a dance, images of the city's founding betrayal, scrubbed from every archive. "No one here was alive when the lie was born," she said. "But all of you have inherited this burden." The guards moved to arrest her, but the mayor, whose grandmother's face flickered in the shard, knelt. "We did not know." The shepherd nodded. "What you learn humbles what you once knew." And so the truth was told, not for judgment, for release, and the city breathed differently. Chapter 3. They walked until the edge of the known map blurred. In the Valley of Gales, they encountered the Oracle of Echo Peace, a machine being whose body was a cathedral, and whose voice could soothe storms. It asked them one question: "What is the cost of truth?" The skyborn one answered, "Peace." The shepherd added, "But never trust." The oracle hummed an agreement and offered its final memory. A vision of the stars screaming, "What silence dare not speak," it said, "still dreams." And then it powered down, gifting them the last map. It had a route not to a place, but to a moment. They followed. At the convergence of breath and starlight, they stood before the great reflecting pool, a mirror so vast it showed not form, but legacy. The shepherd looked in and saw every lie he had let live too long. The sky-born one saw every name she had worn and cast them aside. Together they spoke they had spoken, and the stars wept not from sorrow, but from relief. Truth, at last, was not feared, it was welcomed. They did not return as heroes. They did not return at all, for they had become part of the sky. And above every city that dared now to speak freely, the stars burned a little brighter, because they remembered. Title: The Softest Amber. Year: 138,269,230.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The flame dancer had once performed before kings, queens, and ghosts. Now she spun fire through empty streets. No audience, no applause, only wind. In the age of the great silence, conflict had crept from the shadows, not with swords, but with silence, suspicion, and locked doors. The city of Solvang teetered on the edge of implosion, divided not by ideas, but by refusal to speak. So the flame dancer moved through districts at dawn, her flames dancing stories into the soot and mist. She said nothing, but the flames said everything. Then one morning she was met by the starbound pilgrim wanderer carrying a journal of unsolved mysteries and eyes full of fallen skies. "You dance for no one," he said. "Then they are free to watch without fear," she replied. Chapter 2. He followed, not to solve her, but to study the silence between her steps. Together they reached the broken court, where 12 leaders once ruled. Now 12 fires burned on 12 abandoned thrones, each one marked by bitterness, betrayal, or pride. The pilgrim opened his journal. "They think this war must end in victory. It must end in humility," said the dancer. So they began to clean the thrones, not remove, restore. One by one the city's leaders returned, not summoned but drawn, to see her dance, to hear his questions, not accusations, curiosities. And in their silence the choice appeared, not who would win, but who would listen. Chapter 3. Today the broken court is a gathering place, not for power but presence. The thrones remain, the fires stay lit, but the rules have changed. To speak you must listen first. To lead you must kneel once a season before the flame dancer. And a star-bound pilgrim? He left again, find new cities too proud to whisper. Above the thrones, etched in copper, what you call failure may be the very scaffold of your rise. Light, bow, begin again. Title, The Toll of Kindness. Year, 138,076,923.1. Year, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The river lessened hard through the forgotten plains like a memory that refused to fade. Beneath its tranquil surface ran old power, silent, sacred, and sharp. No one dared cross it without permission, and the one who granted that permission was no king. She was a myth. They called her the one beneath the river. It was said she had once loved a general who died at war, and in her grief had descended into the river's depths, trading her body for eternal watchfulness. From then on, only those who bore true intention could pass unharmed. Most never saw her, but he did. The ghost general. He had died in that same war, or rather had been thought dead. Instead, he lived as a revenant among the wilds, exiled by guilt. His body bore scars that never bled, and his voice carried no echo. One evening he approached the river. He did not seek crossing. He sought her. "I know your name," he whispered. The current paused, and from the water rose a woman not quite spirit, not quite flesh. Her hair shimmered like starlit foam, and her eyes bore the weight of every unspoken goodbye. "You left me," she said. "I died trying to save peace," he replied. "No," she said. "You died trying to be right." And the river roared. Chapter 2. They met at the river's edge each dusk. She asked questions he feared. He offered answers she didn't expect. No apologies, just the slow unfurling of old wounds. She spoke of how kindness was once their language, before orders, before banners, before the world demanded they choose between love and loyalty. He listened, and from his silence bloomed something new. Each night he brought stories from the people on either side of the river, stories of kindness that healed, saved, soothed. She listened too, and the river, once cold and guarded, began to shimmer with warmth. One night she asked, "Would you cross if it meant never seeing me again?" He said, "Only if it helps others meet." She reached out, touched his chest, and found no heartbeat, only memory. "And I will carry you." The water rose, and for the first time in generations, a bridge formed not of stone, but of kindness remembered. Travelers from opposite cities began to meet on the water, guided by her presence and his wordless gaze. No questions were asked, no oaths were sworn, only shared stories and offerings of compassion. And the ghost general smiled, though his face remained still, because peace did not roar, it rippled. Chapter 3. Trouble, of course, followed. Governors from the twin cities feared what they could not brand. They sent envoys, then soldiers, then laws, but the people had already crossed, not the river, the threshold of understanding. They brought offerings to the one beneath the river, flowers, music, bread. Some left names of lost ones. Others brought memories they were ready to forgive. The ghost general stood guard not with sword, but presence. His shadow became sanctuary, his silence a song. One night, as the water stilled under a moon made whole, she said, "There is one toll left." He nodded. She pressed her palm to his chest again. "You must remember love." And suddenly he wept. The tears fell into the river, glowed, and dissolved. His form shimmered. She kissed his forehead, and he faded, not as death, but as release. He had crossed, and she remained not alone, but as legend reborn. Every traveler who waded through the river from then on would pause, feel a warmth, and hear her voice. Every lesson comes with a toll, but many are worth the crossing. And kindness, no longer whispered, became the current of a new world. Title, The Bone Mender. Year, 137,884,615.4. Year, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The child came to her doorstep with a broken arm and a lie in her mouth. "The wind pushed me," she said, but the bone mender didn't ask questions, not at first. She only placed her hands on the arm, hummed the song of Whitefire, and let the bone remember how to be whole. Later, when the child slept, she found bruises on her back that the wind could not have made. In a city where silence was the only safe language, standing for truth meant exile. But the bone mender remembered her own bruises, and the lie she had once told herself, that being silent was the same as being safe. It wasn't. Chapter 2. Word spread that the bone mender had begun speaking names, not loudly but clearly. She didn't point fingers. She told stories of bones healed wrongly because no one asked the truth, of wounds that reopened because the root was never named. The city's guardians warned her. Once. Twice. The third time, they broke the arm of an old man who came to her for help. She mended it and stood in the square, with her hands raised, with her voice stay. They fear what I fix, because it reminds them what they broke. Chapter 3. The bone mender vanished the next day, but her clinic remained open, unwatched. Visitors no longer came just for broken limbs, they came for broken courage, shattered trust, unspoken grief. And they left marked not with medicine, but with truth. On the stone above her clinic, someone carved, "Greatness begins with misunderstanding, even of the self. Be still, mend, and speak." The child grew. She became a healer, and she no longer blamed the wind. She thanked it for blowing open the door she had once been afraid to walk through. Title: The Page Turners. Year: 137,692,307.7. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. It all began with a goose, not a mystical one, not the kind that lays golden eggs or guides heroes into battle, just a fat, waddling, slightly judgmental goose who refused to leave the grand archive of Thurlin, the archivist of dreams who had long since abandoned the idea that her job would ever be quiet-side as the goose once again strutted across the dream index shelves, knocking over memory files and honking at the interns. "Why do we let it in?" asked the trainee, ducking as the scroll exploded into confetti. "Because," the archivist muttered. The caller of Quiet Things said it was important. Indeed, the caller had arrived 3 weeks ago, arms full of hourglasses, feathers in her hair, and a grin that suggested she knew when and how the world would end, but had decided it wasn't worth rushing. She had simply said, "The goose is part of the story," and then vanished behind a door that no one else could open. Now strange things were happening in the archive. Chronobooks were reshuffling themselves. Dream files pulsed with futures not yet conceived. And most concerning of all, the section labeled Unrecorded Tomorrows was leaking. That was not supposed to happen. Maybe the goose has a point, the archivist said to herself, then immediately regretted it, as the creature gave her a smug look and humped twice. Chapter 2. The first real clue came when a child's dream from 3 centuries ahead landed on her desk. It described, in terrifying detail, a future where jokes were outlawed and puns punishable by exile. Laughter became a relic, and even mild chuckles were taxed. The archivist was horrified. Then she noticed something else. Her own name scribbled in the margins, underlined twice, next to a crude drawing of the goose. "Destiny is misfiled," muttered the caller, suddenly appearing beside her with a half-eaten apple and no explanation for how she got there. "Or maybe it's just recursive." The archivist glared. "This says I'm the reason humor dies." The caller winked. "Or lies. What does that even mean?" "It means," the caller said, dragging her toward the leaking shelves, "we have to clean up the mess you haven't made yet." They waded into the Unrecorded Tomorrows section, where time ran sideways and every footstep echoed backward. They found entire timelines scribbled in limericks, and one particularly aggressive book of stand-up prophecy that shouted unsolicited punchlines at passing scholars. "You think this is funny?" the archivist demanded. "Not yet," the caller replied, "but give it a few generations." As they restacked cascading futures and repaired tattered metaphors, the goose hauled from above and nudged a small, dusty volume into view. The title: "The Day Humor Saved the Stars." Inside was a footnote that read, "It all began with a goose." Chapter 3. Cleaning up the timeline was easier than expected, mostly because they didn't. Instead, they rewrote portions of it using puns, riddles, and absurd logic puzzles. The archivist insisted this was irresponsible. The caller insisted it was destiny. The goose contributed by laying an egg in the canonical end section, which immediately hatched into a tiny golden squirrel with impeccable comedic timing. "Ripple effects," said the caller, nodding as the squirrel performed a flawless pratfall. The archivist sighed. You do realize this could alter the trajectory of galactic development, right? Exactly, the caller said. After ages better than prophecy. Back in the present, such as it was, the archivist began documenting everything. Not to preserve it, but to understand it. She wrote about the goose, the squirrel, the stand-up prophecy, and the dream child who accidentally saved humor from extinction. She titled the chronicle "Lost is not the end, but a turning of the page." And she meant it, because somewhere in the folds of time, a generation would look back and wonder who first dared to treat history as something alive, something to be played with and prodded, and occasionally banana peeled. And they remember the archivist of dreams, and the caller of quiet things, and the goose who never asked permission, and they'd laugh, because the page kept turning, and the story kept getting better.